Hey, everybody, welcome to our podcast. We're dropping all at once, and we're talking about what church is going to look like after all this is over. Some things are going to stay, some things are going to go, some things are going to become a medley of two different things, or even a hybrid. And in talking to my good friend Tony Morgan about that, he actually said that's a word we're using a lot. It's a trend we're seeing a lot. And I thought, why don't you come on? And if you know Tony and me, then you know that we both prepared manuscripts, and we're going to read those manuscripts.
I have no idea what we're going to talk about, William, but I'm so excited about the conversation.
It's going to be a hybrid of what I know and what you know, and hopefully what we're all learning together. So welcome back to the show, Tony. It's great to see you. Tell us a little bit about how you guys have been. I mean, it's been quite a roller coaster to be in the church consulting world for the last 12 months.
No doubt. Yeah, because last March, every one of our customers was forced to shut down, which is never a good sign for business.
That's a bad thing for businesses.
Never a good thing. But, our team, we decided we're going to double down and we're going to resource church leaders as much as we can through this difficult season. And then on the other side of that, our hope is there will be plenty of opportunity to serve churches. And the good news is, William, you and I were chatting about this a moment ago, is we've really heard from a number of churches just in the last couple of months that are trying to now figure out, we've been through COVID, and no, we may not be on the other side of it completely, but there's a sense that we need to figure out what our next steps look like regarding our ministry strategy. And so because of that, we're having a lot of conversations around multi-site, around mergers, around trying to figure out how do we just get back to church and re-engage church in a new way. But we're also having a lot of conversations about what it is to be a hybrid church, where we're committed to ministry and in-person environments and online environments as well.
Tell me more about that, because my friend Carrie Newhoff and I've had this 12-month debate where we're on either sides of things, and actually we're pretty close together, but we're just on two sides of a single coin. I'm convinced that the hardwiring in humans runs for too many thousands of years for people to just quit coming together. I just don't think that's the case. Carrie would say, no, digital's it. Don't know if in-person's coming back or not, but it won't look the same. And both of those viewpoints are hyperbole from what we actually both believe. But I do think we lean a little harder one way or the other. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say, and I've been sharing in recent weeks, I don't think we're going to have a true read on the impact of what we've been through until Easter of 2022. And by Easter of 2022, I think we'll have a pretty clear read on what we've been through and how that's going to impact church ministry going forward. I will say, I think I'm somewhere in between you and Carrie, it sounds like, because I do believe that people need other people. And our team was a remote team before remote was cool, William. We've been a remote team since the very beginning, and we've learned how to operate. We've learned how to do life together. But even with that, pre-COVID, we were at least once a quarter coming together face to face, someplace in the U.S., just to be able to hang out and spend time together. And we got some work done, but it was really more about that time, just being together face to face. And I think that craving that's in me now is probably, I have to think it's reflected in the rest of our culture, where people in our church are going to want that opportunity after all these months of isolation to come back together, to be with friends again. And I actually think this is going to be an opportunity for potential revival in churches too, because I think our society is going to be looking for community. And if the church positions itself well, this could be a great opportunity for us to actually engage people that are currently outside the church and outside the faith, but are going to be looking for the types of community gatherings that we can offer as ministries. So I think there's opportunity there for sure.
Well, one thing that I've been a flag I've been waving, and I'm seeing it happen more already, is there'll be a new kind of pastor needed. And it's actually an old kind of pastor. It's almost like, having been a pastor right. I was finishing up my time as a pastor right when Craig was planting his first video venues for Life Church, and we overlapped a little bit. And it was like the beginning of an arms race for the best content. Like the church that could provide the best message would get the best crowd. If you had the coolest series, then you got the people. Well, that's all over now, because you can just dial up whatever message you want on demand. And even my mother is dialing up, services on demand, and she's pretty traditionalist, right? I think this new kind of pastor is the old school pastor who's actually there for people who just showed up at the hospital. A good friend who was an amazing pastor. He nobody ever wanted him to leave, and he couldn't preach out of a wet paper bag. I mean, he couldn't get out of anything. But he showed up for people, and I think that connection is actually going to be a more repeatable skill set for pastors going forward. So I'm equally hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll be interested to see what back to school looks like this fall, because that's such a rally point for churches. And I'm hopeful that maybe a little sooner than next Easter, we'll see some something on the EKG that would tell us, okay, here's kind of what we're looking at. But yeah,
I think that, definitely signs of life that we're already seeing, even in these days too, William. But I mean, it's the challenge. I actually just read another article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and after all that we've experienced, and really the challenge too of getting the vaccine fully rolled out, and new strains of the virus popping up, and just how that looks different too in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. They're suggesting, yes, eventually we're going to move from pandemic to endemic. And at that point too, we just have to realize after all these months, there is going to be shifting that happens in people's lives and in society. We just don't know what that looks like yet. And so hopefully in the next months here, we'll get a better sense of that, which will certainly then help us in church world figure out how do we engage the mission that God's called us to, right?
That's right. And the mission God's called you to, if I remember it right, is to help churches get unstuck.
Yes, so yeah, it's I'm not very clever with marketing and branding. I just started hearing pastors say years ago, it feels like we're stuck. And I said, that's a good thing. Because then I'll just call my organization the Unstuck Group, and it's worked pretty well for us through the years.
You don't have to explain it at all. But
No.
now, if you're getting busy right now, does that mean everybody's stuck?
Well, I don't know. I think we're like I said, we're still seeing signs of health in church, and I am actually for an industry that's not known for embracing change and making pivots. I'm really proud of what I've seen across churches, because really no church asked for what we experienced, obviously, but whether they fully embraced it or were forced to embrace it, it's really amazing to see the pivots that churches have taken. And even in the midst of kind of the recovery from this too, how churches are just getting creative about reintroducing in-person environments as they still engage ministry online. And I'm really encouraged by generally what I'm seeing. There's still some churches, even early on, that kind of dug in their heels, and I would argue have let the way they do church get in the way of why they do church. But overall, I've been really impressed with how churches have engaged this. But that said, we're all at a place that we've never been before. And even before COVID, I would get calls from pastors of well-known large churches, and they would express for where they are, they felt like they were stuck. Now, does that mean their church wasn't healthy and thriving and growing and increasing its impact? Not at all. All that meant was they were stuck in their current season, trying to figure out what do our next steps look like so that we can continue to grow the impact of our ministry. And I think that's where a lot of churches are right now.
When you talk about a hybrid church, I get a picture in my head, but walk me through what you're talking about when you say you see a hybrid coming.
Yeah, so at the very basics, what we're suggesting is that there's going to be a combination of in-person ministry environments and online ministry environments that are helping people move from where they are to where God wants them to be. And the way I've expressed this is, I just kind of went back a number of months ago and started to look at my personal spiritual journey from a point where I wasn't interested or even aware of things related to faith. And then through a series of circumstances, I would argue I became curious about faith and who Jesus was. And then eventually I became a believer, and then I was discipled, and then I became a disciple maker. And there are different nuances. You may be familiar with the Engel scale, different nuances of what those steps look like. But at the very basic, those were the 5 kind of phases of my personal spiritual journey that I identified. And what I believe is this, that going forward, churches are going to have a ministry strategy, both in person and online, that engages people in all seasons of that spiritual journe.
Does that mean on all seasons of their life too? Like I look at I'll just play devil's advocate. I look at the miserable failure that public school has been via Zoom. I mean, it's just awful. Kids are failing out. They're not engaging. They're not. What should the church be warned of through that? And what can the church do to prevent that on the disciple making track for kids in an online setting?
Yeah, so the challenge, of course, is we were all forced into 100% digital at the very front end of all of this. And I think as several folks, including people like me, were starting to talk about the importance of not just looking at this as a stopgap, we need to be thinking about online ministry going forward too, after the pandemic is behind us. I think people were reading into this, well, this is going to replace in-person church. No, it's not. And because of I think primarily because of what you mentioned earlier is, God hardwired into us this need for personal relationship with other people. And so the challenge, of course, for the youngest folks that we're trying to minister to in our congregations is, I would argue that's even more pronounced because of the development that is required within young people. And I know I still have some high school students. I know you still have some kids at home too, William. It's like, no, just getting them in online environments is not helping them. It's not helping them with their education. But maybe more importantly, it's not helping them develop to become healthy young adults. And so I don't think online can replace, especially with kids and students. But I do think there are ways for us to complement what we're doing in our in-person environments with some online resources and online community that can still help students and kids take their next steps toward Jesus as well.
Give me a for instance with that. Tell me, maybe you can or can't name the church, but what's a client you're working with where you're seeing some new ideas that are working well?
Yeah, I will say, of all work we've done quite a bit of surveying throughout this whole journey that we've been on over the last year as churches. And it's been fascinating because you would have thought on the front end of this that young adults, students, that would be the generation that would still lean in when it comes to online ministry. And what we saw time and time again in our research is that was actually the generation that most disengaged from church and online ministry during this season. And again, I think a lot of it goes back to that hard wiring that God put into us, that especially in that time in anyone's life, you need other people. One of my teammates would also argue it has something to do with hormones at that age, but let's just set that aside for a moment.
It's the same conclusion. They think they need other people.
they need other people. That's right. So, I mean, I would argue from the churches that we're working with, when it comes to ministry for kids and students, it's less what they're doing directly for the kids and students. It's more what they're doing to equip the parents of those kids and students.
Excellent.
And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for us.
So what's a church, like one that comes to my mind, if you're listening today, you want to, where do I see that in action? I'd go to Mariners. They're doing an amazing job of just that. Do you have oh yeah, that church over in,
Yeah. Well, let me share. There have been several churches that of different shapes and sizes that we have found through this season. I think that are just winning when it comes to online ministry. One on the larger end of the scale, Crossroads Church in Cincinnati, Ohio,
yes.
And it's a multi-site church, several locations. But how they have engaged online ministry during the season beyond just putting a service online, phenomenal.
Another Brian was way ahead of his time on getting
absolutely
on board with this. Ironically, last week, it'll be live by the time this airs. Last week, he called us to ask him to help because he needed a different approach. He just wasn't getting it done in student ministry.
Student ministry.
So
yeah, there you go.
You want to go to a rockin' church as a student pastor. Here's your day. The Lord is speaking to you.
Yeah. Let me give you another example as far as digital ministry concerned. Again, this church, Grace Church, I think it's in Massachusetts. And now I don't even know. There's so many Grace churches. I wish I could quote you the website, but I loved what they were doing in the midst of all this, especially early on. I haven't seen in recent weeks if they've kept this up, but on a regular basis, they were doing webinars on different topics, including several webinars dedicated to parents who were dealing with that challenge of online education and everything that came with that. They were doing these webinars, and what I really appreciated about how they approached this is they didn't feel like they had to bring the expertise. In other words, the pastor didn't feel like he had to have all the answers. They had several other people on their team that weren't presenting, they were facilitating conversations with people in their community that had answers on these topics. And I love that because I think it gives us a glimpse of maybe what our content strategies need to look like going forward as churches. We don't have to pretend we have all the answers, but if we can help facilitate conversations with the people that do have answers, I think that's going to be a huge resource to people that we're trying to reach.
Yes.
And especially for those people on that front end of the spiritual journey, it's going to be tough to convince them to either come to a service or show up for a service online. But if we can start to create content that addresses the questions that they're asking related to life and spiritual questions, and do that in a way that we're more facilitating conversations rather than coming across like we have all the answers, I think that's going to be a win for the church in the long run.
Well, and I'm seeing, you've probably seen Levi and Jenny Lusko's approach right now is to do kind of almost like masterclass, that's in everybody's social media feed. They're doing a class on marriage, and it's an online on demand, just like everybody's taking courses, but they've done it for their church. And you might say, well, I'm not nearly as cool as Levi and Jenny. Well, not many people are, but you're called to your particular local community. What is the issue in your zip code that you could facilitate a conversation in? I mean, that hyper contextualization of ministry, I think that's where the I don't want to say the money is, but the payoff, the dividend, the way for the church to show the world that it matters is it just get as local as you can and facilitate conversation. That's good.
Yeah, and along those lines, William, I've always talked about there's these three types of, well, there's actually four, but there's a neighborhood church, there's a community church, there's a regional church. There will always be a handful of national or world global churches out there, but most of us aren't going to be the leading churches like that. Most of us are going to be in those first three categories. And as it relates to hybrid church, my sense is, and again, we're all kind of guessing going forward, if you're pastoring a neighborhood church, you may not have to lean hard like some of the other churches into the online side of this. But you get to leverage all the strength of being a neighborhood church and the neighborhood connections that you have, you need to continue to do that. If you're a community church or a regional church, though, I would argue for you to engage the people that you're trying to reach, you are going to have to begin to make some shifts, and not only your strategy, but for your benefit, William, the structure piece is going to be huge.
It's going to be
because I had a conversation with a pastor a few months ago, pastoring a large church, and he said, here's the challenge that I'm facing right now. He said, 100% of my staff is focused on ministry environments inside our church building, but it's only impacting a third of the people that call themselves members of my church. The other 2/3 of my church are all currently engaging ministry online, and none of my staff are focused on ministering to those folks with that focus. And so I think this is going to be the opportunity again, especially for those community churches and for those regional churches, is we're going to have to revisit our structure and revisit the types of staff team that we're hiring, so that we can really continue to engage at the appropriate level, both sides of this equation. And is it going to be a 50-50 split? I doubt it. But we do need to start having dedicated resources that are focusing on both aspects of what it's going to mean to be a hybrid church to engage our mission going forward.
Absolutely. And I think the challenge a lot of established, been around a long time churches have struggled with, maybe more than anything our clients struggle with, is the ability to reach across generations. And wow, what an opportunity now, because the staffing and structures, you're going to have a chief communications officer. That might look like a 5-hour-a-week labor contract job with a 20-year-old, but it might be that's your full-time right-hand person if you're in a larger setting. And that's innately going to be someone who either thinks a lot younger than their age or actually is a lot younger. So I'm really hopeful it's going to be shakeup is not a bad thing, and the Lord does prune things he loves. So,
or you may need to hire my mom, who knows more about Facebook than I know. So either direction, you can go really young, or you could hire my mom.
I think all of the grandparents know more about Facebook than we do, Tony. What are you seeing as a hybrid? Like if I'm a pastor and I'm either multi-site or thinking about going multi-site, let's go with I'm multi-site. What's going to be different about my life after this is over, as opposed to the multi-site models that worked or didn't work before? Are you seeing anything new coming down the pipe as far as you can see right now?
Well, here's my observation pre-COVID. The biggest multi-site mistake I was seeing churches make is that they, rather than being one church in multiple locations, they were actually multiple churches in multiple locations. And I don't think what we've experienced in COVID is going to change that in any way. I think if you're trying to get, in fact, it's going to make the challenges of being multiple churches in multiple locations even more pronounced. And so if digital strategy is going to be a piece of your full strategy to accomplish the mission God's given your church, and you are a multi-site, I think it even highlights more so the need to get real clarity about who we are as a church, what is our ministry strategy, and how are we going to try to replicate that strategy in multiple locations, including online. And so it even, I think, shines a stronger light on us needing to get clarity on that strategy.
What, before the world fell apart, everybody that was growing and hustling was like saving up for the next site, or they're merging with an older church, or denominations were handing them older properties, and multi-site was just kind of mushrooming. Is that going to continue, or do you see?
I think it's going to accelerate, William. And this is where, in fact, a lot of the churches we're working with now are getting all kinds of calls from churches that are dying, and that's only been accelerating because of what we've experienced in the last year. And they're inquiring about merger opportunities. And this is where I always tell the larger, healthier church, you gotta make sure first you have a clear understanding of your ministry strategy and your multi-site strategy before you step into that merger conversation. In other words, you got to have a clear understanding of who you are and what you want your marriage to look like before you actually have the wedding. And I'm seeing, even in the season, churches are going too fast. They see it, this is God speaking when someone approaches them and says, we want to merge. And it may be God speaking and saying that you want to merge, but you need to have clarity about the mission God's called you to, the strategy that you're embracing, and what you want that relationship to look like long-term before you commit to the actual merger and going through with the wedding process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. At the risk of sounding like the snooty Presbyterian, that I guess I am, I would add theology. And I'm sure you meant that when you said strategy, but
yes.
Oh my goodness. Tony, I can't tell you, like,
well,
so many times,
go ahead.
So many times in a search now, I'm having to figure out what the theology of the church is, and they haven't even written it down anywhere. And you kind of have to piece it together, but it's there. It's not like, oh, just Jesus. No.
My team and I were just actually talking about this past week. It's just fascinating how, for decades, churches have had, this is our theological position. And if part of that may be a reason why they've gotten to the place where they are, and they're needing to merge with another church. And then they start to talk about merging to survive as a church. And all of a sudden, all those decades of being so focused on this is our theology kind of goes out the window, and they're willing to accept anything as long as they can keep their building and keep the name of their church and all these other things. Well, theology tends, go ahead.
Having lived through the main line, that's the only thing that glued us together was a pension plan and property. And that's no marriage. That is just a real forced schizophrenia.
That's why I think there's going to be opportunities both for joining churches to join with another healthy, thriving church. And I think there's going to be opportunities in these coming years for healthy, thriving churches to acquire assets that will allow them to expand their reach in a way that is going to be a phenomenal stewardship of God's resources. But you need to go into that with open eyes, and really you need to have clarity about who you are and your strategy before you start to have conversations about getting married with another church.
Yes, absolutely. I'm walking alongside several churches that are going to unmulti-site a couple of sites because they realized after the last year, with crisis after crisis after crisis, parts of our church doesn't think the same way the rest of the church does, and we probably ought to have a Paul and Barnabas moment, not good guy or bad guy, but just, wow, we're more different than we thought. So
through the years of helping churches with multi-site strategy, I don't think it's an overstatement, William, to say that we probably helped more churches go more about the same number of churches go multi-site as we've helped unmulti-site too. I mean, and the thing is, you in all of the stories that you hear, you typically only hear about the healthy, thriving churches that are opening new locations and everything's going well. But there are many stories out there of churches that jumped into multi-site too fast, and as a result of that are going through some difficult, challenging seasons of trying to figure out how do we unravel all of this. So again, we always get counselors before we go into a marriage, and you don't have to hire us, but hire somebody that has been through this, that can help you have the right conversations before you pursue mergers or before you start to think about expanding into multiple locations.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, so much of our work just dovetails one another. But if you're out there today and you're multi-site and you're wondering, should we do more sites, fewer sites? Think 10 years out, 15 years out. What does this look like? Man, the number of succession plans that we're doing for people in their 50s right now is through the roof. because people are like, okay, I'm going to look 10 years down the road. And most of the planning that we end up doing for succession is not who's the next guy. That's the last piece of the puzzle. The puzzle starts with, what's our multi-site strategy when we don't have Max Licato as the communicator anymore? We can't just go get another one of those. Like, I can't go find another firm.
Yeah.
But Max has done a wonderful job of unwinding his campuses as he has realized, I've got a limited amount of time before I finish things out. I don't just think about, I got a deal right here in front of me, I got to take it must be the Lord. Think 10, 15 years down the road, and how does this scale up or unwind? And just know it's going to take longer than you think. I don't know. Maybe I'm out of my lane speaking that way.
Well, I think there's going to be succession is going to be a huge topic of discussion, and we've already started to see that, obviously. But I think one of the other driving factors in this, William, is, as I mentioned earlier, whatever it looks like on the other side of what we've been through the last year, it's probably going to look different. And I think a lot of pastors my age and older are they're almost going through the process again of, is this really what I'm called to? And as a result of that, we're going to all be seeing, there are going to be some folks that say, yeah, I'm ready for this last run of my ministry. And I think we're going to see many instances where pastors are going to decide this is really not what I signed up for, and they're going to be ready to pass on the baton.
Totally.
So it's the season that we're going to be in, and I'm grateful for the great ministry that pastors around the world have been doing in this season. But I don't blame them for kind of rethinking, is this really what God has called me to do?
Not what I signed up for. Yeah. We're hearing a lot of that. And some people are ready to re-up and do another 10 years. And some people are like, they need a new kind of person. We've been saying, to anyone who listen, the next 24 months, you will face more turnover than you have in the last 5 years. It's just going to happen. And I think you're exactly right. Some of it's just, the world changed. So
you're right. Not just for the senior pastor role, but all throughout our organization. We're going to see that type of shift start to happen.
Yeah. So I'm not stuck as a church, but I'm stuck because I don't know what's next. How do I get in touch with Tony and help him get me unstuck?
Yeah. So the website is theunstuckgroup.com. And I think there's actually a phone number that if you really want to call somebody and talk to somebody, you can do that. But most people reach out through chat or the Get Started form that's available there. But we'd love to talk with you about how we're helping churches in the season and how we can serve your ministry as well.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tony. It's always good to see you, and just thankful for what you're doing to help the church.